Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this new episode. Today we are with Dr. Anna Sergi. Please, Anna, introduce yourself to our lovely audience.
Hello, Julia, and hello, everyone. Yes, I am a professor of criminology, which is essentially researcher and lecturer in sociology of deviance and crime, which effectively means that while I'm not teaching, I am researching and I am doing a series of different projects, mostly going places and talking to people and gathering data. And my object of research is organized crime, specifically the Ndrangheta, the Calabrian mafia, its mobility to Australia, mobility to Canada, mobility to Europe, you name it. Wherever they go, I go. And also, on a different side note, illicit trade, cocaine trade, ports. I love ports. I love containers for some reason, probably because they're colorful. And yeah, so I do different type of projects within universities, and I write books and then I write articles, and that's pretty much all the time I have for to do. Yeah,
it's a lot of time, a lot of things to do.
yes,
Very busy academic. I read some of your article in particular regarding the Italian mafia in Australia and the Italian mafia in Melbourne, or in general New South Wales and everywhere. Particularly because I am based in Australia and a lot of my listeners are in Australia as well. And that's why I thought it was going to be a great opportunity to ask you questions about the organized crime in Australia, both Italians and non-Italian. Reading your articles, I saw that you mentioned the role of women in the families. And I was very curious to know more about what you discovered, about what the role of women is in the Italian mafia families, especially because when I think about the Italian mafia, I think about a very patriarchal organization. So what's their role there and how has it evolved?
Okay, so first of all, the Ndrangheta, which is the only mafia among the Italians which exists in Australia, comes from Calabria, where I'm also from, and they have changed drastically since they've been in Melbourne or in Australia more generally, for obvious reasons. We are talking about an organization which is not just secret, but also very, very old. We are now at the 5th generation, so whoever is within the so-called Calabrian mafia, Italian mafia today is not really Italian. Although they do keep some of the traditions and some of the customs that they brought from home, or they wish they did. So sometimes they make stuff up. So that's a premise that is necessary to answer the question on women, because the women of the Ndrangheta are following some of the trajectories of women within the Calabrian diaspora in Australia. So a minority are within very orthodox families, whereby for 2 generations, not one, as it's normal and customary, they tend to marry within the diaspora. So Calabrian who marry Calabrian or Italian from the South specifically, and where expectations on roles are very tight still up to the 4th generation. So there are families in some suburbs of Adelaide or in Mildura or in Griffith, New South Wales, or somewhere in the rural areas between Griffith, New South Wales, Riverina Valley and Sydney, that are still very orthodox in that sense. Women are often prevented from leaving the family. They don't go to school. If they go to school, they are expected to go home afterwards. And when I say school, I mean mostly university. So if they go to university, let's say to Sydney or to Melbourne, they are expected to come back afterwards to live near their families. And so it's very, how can I from our perspective, is very liberty crushing. There are, however, the majority of women, I would say, who are not living in these conditions, who are indeed much more free. And in Melbourne, for example, you have women who are lawyers, who work for, I don't know, the Ministry of Education, who work within departments of energy efficiency, who work in various different roles, as you would expect any woman to do today in contemporary Melbourne. Their heritage, their legacy is something that they keep at home. So yes, I come from a Calabrian family. My Calabrian family might have some, let's say, fringes who are involved in some organized crime, but it's not the whole family necessarily. So, and it's considered to be a good thing if women work and do, progress, because if the women work and progress, that means support for the family as well. So this is particularly important, and it's important also when you consider the criminal side. So whenever, let's put it on the other side. So whenever investigators are looking within these families, and maybe they find a patchwork situation whereby a brother and a cousin are involved in the drug trade. The father used to be involved into, I don't know, some money laundering scheme of whichever sort, and then the daughter is working as an apprentice or I don't know, a practitioner, or whichever role they want to work in, with a lawyer or with an accountant, then that woman becomes of interest for the investigator, because she might come in as in a role of a facilitator in, whether she is in the judicial system or whether she is in the financial sector. So those women are even given by law enforcement a role that they might not have, or they might have in the future. So they are constantly kept under scrutiny in a way that tells you a lot about Australia, meaning that it is perfectly normal to imagine that a role within a very patriarchal criminal organization like the Ndrangheta could go to a woman. So these things tend to somehow, imitate each other. So we think that women can get these roles as law enforcement or investigators, or even, analysts more generally, and then they go and get these roles because for a number of reasons, which might be a bit complicated to explain. But yeah, so there are a variety of these possibilities. There is also a minority of women who feel like their legacy is too crushing, that the pigeonholing which some of them migrant families from 3-4 generations ago are somewhat demanding of them is too indeed demanding, so they keep away. So you see them marrying someone and move out of the city where they come from. So I am from Melbourne, I move out, marrying someone who is from Sri Lanka, and move to Darwin. So you see these women completely separating. Sometimes this happens also in normal Calabrian families of Calabrian origins, with people who reject their heritage. They don't want to be. It's a minority, especially within the Ndrangheta. The Ndrangheta tends to be tends to keep a certain level of traditional expectations on women, on men, on whoever. So it is a lot more difficult to do. Intersectionality is not really a thing in women of the Ndrangheta families, but sometimes, yes, you do have that. So very polyedric role.
Yeah, lots of, as women are everywhere, there is lots of variabilities, and you can never put people in a box. But I was curious, I think you mentioned it briefly, about the role of strategically marrying people or matching people for, I imagine, consolidating power or
like royal families. Yeah.
And that will be, in this type of arranged marriages, I probably feel more on the woman's side, because I think often women get the shorter side of the straw in this type of arrangement. Is it something that you encountered in your research about these strategic marriages?
Yeah. So it depends whether we are talking about Australia or Calabria. So in Australia, the minority of women that I told you about at before, so those who who are given very little freedom, who are expected to behave in a certain way, who never leave home, who live within the context of origin and are always expected to go back, those are the women whose expectation of marriage is very limited. It's very, it happens less and less that you have the kind of arranged marriage that we still have in Calabria sometimes within the more orthodox families. So it still happens, and it still happens in Australia across those families who are what I call the dynasties of the Ndrangheta, like royal dynasties. They can't just keep, people marrying whoever they want and risk losing the surname, risk losing the legacy, risk losing the reputation. So women, in that sense, really depends at what stage or who they are within the family. To give you an example, if I am the firstborn daughter of 3 daughters within a family with no men, no male son, then my marriage is like the one of a princess. I am the one who is supposed to marry well, but the person who marries me, if my father is someone very important, is the one that is going to get the advantage there. So there is a little bit of a courting in place and arranging of what is beneficial for the family. So in that sense, the woman has very little way of agreeing or disagreeing with the candidates that are given to her. So she's choosing among 3 people, 4 people that are considered more or less advantageous, and they are coming from similar families or from emerging families. Sometimes one thing that we see very often between, I remember, I'm thinking of a case in Canberra, a family that no one knows, who all of a sudden marries within a very important family of the Ndrangheta, and all of a sudden this family we know nothing about becomes a leader in the drug trade in Canberra. And the reason why that happens is because when you bridge 2 families through marriage, of course you are extending the reputation from one to the other. So if you are the firstborn daughter, your role is very much about marrying in a specific way. If you are lucky enough to be the second or the third, no one really cares. You are kind of the spare, and therefore you have a little bit more openness. However, that doesn't mean that you can marry outside a certain circle. You are still marrying within a selected few, and that happens still today, 2025. It still happens in Australia. Again, we are not talking about 50 families. We are talking about 10, 12 families that do this. They are really huge families, so very large. They've been doing this since they arrived in Australia, which was before the Second World War. And it's, they are the ones that you will find in the newspaper since the 60s, and they kind of is what they have left. They have very little left. So it's not like they're doing great in terms of finances. They just have to keep their reputation very strict. You have other cases which go completely the other way, with women who marry strangers in certain Melbourne families. And then this stranger, Anglo-Saxon stranger, is brought into the Ndrangheta family. I'm thinking of a woman, she's the daughter of a fairly apical member of the Ndrangheta, but she has a brother. So her brother is the important man of the, the siblings. He's the one who is getting into trouble. He's been arrested a few times. He's involved in the drug trade. He's involved in money laundering. So the brother is the heir to the throne, let's say. So she married this man whose name is Sam. He is Australian. He has a very Australian name. And this person all of a sudden decided is being deemed worth to join the family. So he's going to the meetings, he's going to Calabria, to the meetings in Calabria. He's showing up places with the family. And sure, why not? Apparently, the guy is worth investing in. So this is very Australian in a way. It happens in Calabria as well, but obviously in Calabria you don't have the ethnic element. You don't have marrying outside the family means marrying another Italian, another Calabrian randomly. Here means marrying an Australian, marrying a Greek. We have that. So people who have to be vouched family by family. The good thing about the Ndrangheta, if there is one, is that every family is different. So certain rules can't really apply. But yeah, we have this man. I can only imagine this man, Australian, very Australian looking guy, by the way, very blonde and very tall and very Australian, with an Australian accent, who shows up in the middle of the Aspromonte mountain in Calabria with a meeting of the Ndrangheta. Hey, these things happen. So
Well,
yeah,
all eyes on him, I would imagine.
exactly. But if he comes vouched for, then people will admit him. And of course, he will never be able to climb up to a ranking that is too apical. Of course not. But I'm pretty sure that where his family goes, he's gonna go. So.
Wow, I really like the word you use, dynasty, because it made me think about the TV show
Yes.
from the 80s, 90s, and
Yeah.
listening from weddings and arrests and all that. It really put me in that mood. It was very nice. You mentioned a couple of times money laundering, and that's definitely something that I think it's really key to talk about when we talk about organized crime. And I wanted to ask you if there are specific sectors in which you see the Italian mafia is branching out in terms of legitimate businesses.
Okay, so you use the term Italian mafia. I do not, because Italian mafia is a very vague term. I specifically talk about the 'Ndrangheta.
Okay. Thank you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's just that Italian mafia is a very is a way that police has to talk about abroad. It's confusing. So let's talk about the 'Ndrangheta, because the 'Ndrangheta has a specific modus operandi which others might not have. So when we talk about the 'Ndrangheta in Australia, the sectors are very similar to what have been elsewhere. So it's not peculiar in many ways, although we do have some Australian specific businesses, which obviously you don't have elsewhere. So the rule of thumb is go small, go frequent. So we are not looking at very complicated schemes of money laundering involving 7 different layers and 5 different brokers all over the world. We are not looking at that. The 'Ndrangheta is a traditional criminal group, and traditional means that the old generation doesn't trust new ways of laundering money. They like the old ways, which is real estate, something tangible I can see and touch and eventually sell, or shops and commerce, cash-intensive businesses that are usually something that give back pretty soon. So the smaller, the better, because the smaller means more controllable. So you don't have to lose sight of your investment for too long. It's going to come back to you pretty soon. So the 'Ndrangheta and money laundering are probably more complicated in a way and to detect, because they are very small. So you are looking at restaurants, you're looking at pizzerias, you're looking at ice cream shops. But sometimes with the dynasties especially, you are looking at a family-based little empire of businesses, all connected with each other through normal formulas of different type of shareholding. So it's not rocket science. So they buy shares in each other's businesses, and these businesses then have holdings. They have an holding, and then they have subsidiaries within them. So they tend to still keep track of it with family members. Another role for women to have, to keep certain businesses attached to some woman in the family that might or might not be interested in the business, or men as well. But this tends to happen more in those families who are dynasties. So we are at the fourth, fifth generation. So there is a family that I have been following around for a bit. They are not doing anything illegal anymore, apart from the suspicion of money laundering, which, however, law enforcement in Australia is having a very hard time to prove. They've been suspected and investigated many times, but it's very difficult to prove. They own 26 pages worth of company house records. So they have a lot of businesses, all in the same area. They have a winery, for example, and the winery appears to be clean. There's nothing wrong with the winery. They have a farm with certain animals that they sell to restaurants, and they have a restaurant-like kind of business whereby, sorry, not a restaurant like an import-export type of business that is serving different restaurants in the area. And that one is very cash intensive, because how do you know how many chickens or whatever they are breeding are you killing every year? You can say, oh, here I have 2 million chickens and I sold 1 million and a half. Prove me wrong. So it's very difficult to count. So they have that kind of business. Then they have businesses that are linked to that, to the winery, whereby one of the shareholders of the winery is the main shareholder of the fruit juice, in company. So they have this kind of sector, separating sectors, whereby it seems that each business is a standalone business, but then it is a family business in the true sense, so that it's all connected to the main family, but it's very difficult to understand where the money is going. So in terms of communicating vessels, it's very difficult for law enforcement. So law enforcement hypothesize that one of the businesses used for money laundering of drugs from another family, which is connected to this one, but then some other businesses are kept clean, purposefully, for a facade of legitimacy. So this is very complicated to investigate. A lot easier is when you have businesses who are, like in Melbourne, linked to more directly to the drug trade. So law enforcement has been able to see, okay, money is going in and is getting out clean, but the money that is going in is much easier to connect to the proceeds of crime. And that is what you want as law enforcement, but is very rarely the way the Ndrangheta works. The Ndrangheta tends to clean the money outside of Australia, into Indonesia, into Pakistan, into wherever, and then the money moves back in. Sometimes the money never leaves. So you have fake transaction whereby it seems like I'm moving money into Pakistan, but the money is wired but never leaves my desk. Is coming back as new transaction, but it's the same money. So it's very, it's not just the Ndrangheta that does that. It's a very common way. It's the Chinese way, as we call it in the field, the way in which many Chinese groups launder cash through banking products. Then it's all a fake type of transaction. But yeah, most of the time, that money that comes back is used to buy real estate, is used to buy land. There is still land involved. Australia has a lot of land, and land that then is used for different reasons. Money is sent back home to Calabria, to certain fringes of the family that then use it for the drug trade from Europe. And some money goes back into drug trade or into whatever other business they are investing in illegally. So it's there is not one way, but as I said, most of the time it's go small, keep it in the family, trying to find ways to never lose sight of the cash, and effectively trying to confuse law enforcement with company structures that are not easy to investigate. Australia has a bit of an issue with money laundering investigations, regardless of the Ndrangheta.
So is it drug trafficking the major way, illegal way in which Ndrangheta make money in Australia, or other predicate crimes that They
Australia, yeah, yeah, drug trafficking is definitely what accounts for a lot of the criminal activities. And when we say drug trafficking, we mean cocaine, but we also mean methamphetamines in Australia, which they don't do elsewhere, by the way. This is a very Australian business. However, the legitimate businesses are not to be discarded. The Ndrangheta makes a lot of money. Ndrangheta families make a lot of money in legal businesses by fueling money from the drug trade and frauding certain businesses. I'm thinking of some the entry that they want in certain contracts, government contracts that they might have. There was a case a few years back with wind power, of all things, somewhere in between. I think it was at the border between. I think it was technically southern Australia, but it was effectively at the border with Western Australia. So there was a contract for a wind farm, and so they entered that. And when they enter this type of contract, then they end up doing a subpar type of work, and basically speculating on that. So getting, inflating the sums of money that they spend to get the money back within the contract, and then gaining from not doing the work as they should have. That happens in construction. It happened a lot in construction back in the day, now a bit less. There are more controls. So there is still quite a bit of money made through the illicit company that they have, the legal companies, by defrauding certain sectors. So it's still, but I would say, 60, 70% is drugs, and 30, 40, depending on the area, is other type of businesses. But with drugs, it's more complicated because the Ndrangheta is not alone. They can't act alone, neither in Australia nor elsewhere. For the drug trade, you need partners, you need any other type of ethnic group. You need to split the cake, which is still a lot of cake. So it's not like you are, renouncing any type of calories, but still, it requires a different type of exposure and a different type of risk.
This is one of the most insidious part of crime and money laundering, is that at the end, when a criminal groups have virtually infinite amount of capital that they can use to invest in legitimate businesses, while on the legal society, we are constrained by debt and having to pay bills and competition. But on that side, you just have as much money as you can possibly think of, really.
And in fact, you see that not everyone in the Ndrangheta can afford that. The Ndrangheta families are often seen as, you might notice that I speak in the plural. I always speak in the plural. I don't like the Ndrangheta does, because the Ndrangheta is not a unique body of homogeneous thinking. Each family is different, and we are not talking about a lot of family, but quite a lot of diversification across them. So some families, I did a study on the diversification of the family 2 years ago. And some families are poor. They're not exactly booming because they don't have the kind of capital coming in like others. They got out of the drug trade, or their position in the drug trade is not an apical position. The drug trade is lucrative, but it's only as depending on where you are. If you are financing the drug trade, meaning that you are investing capital in the drug trade, then the amount of money that comes back to you is in proportion a lot more. But if you are stuck in the middle of the distribution, or even the wholesale distribution, the money that comes back to you is a lot less. And so some families, especially some of the families that have been around for a long time, I call them the holdovers, because they are the one who wanted to be dynasties and they can't because they don't have the cash. So they're a bit pathetic in the way they try and conquer a role in the drug trade. They can't do it because there are people better than them at doing this. So they are oftentimes left with reputation. So they are known as Ndrangheta family, but their reputation is no currency, doesn't translate in money. Other families instead are the opposite. They don't do anything. They don't invest. I mean, they invest in the drug trade, but from far away, their role is to be guarantors of the drug trade that someone else does. So they get a cut without doing any of the risk. And these are the dynasties who we find in the New South Wales, in the Riverina area. They are the dynasties for a reason, because it's like royalty. They get money without doing anything out of the investment they made in the years, and because they are the protectors of other people who take the risk for them. And these people are the ones who have cash and who can diversify at the point of being completely legitimate in the surface. There is one family I'm thinking about. They haven't done anything technically illegal in 40 years, but they are believed to be, or with very hard evidence, they are behind a lot of the drug trade when it comes to guaranteeing cash for new drug traffickers. So that's the position you want to be. But not everyone has that. So money laundering is problematic for this type of organized crime, because it's very, very difficult to prove the link between the proceeds of the illicit activity and the actual investment. And when you're good at that, you are very far away from drugs, as far away as you can be. And it does require all different type of investigation to even imagine the connection. And this is where most countries, I wouldn't say fail, but they make choices within regulations that do not allow for that. At some point, you have to stop. You can't go any farther. If you lose the trace of the proceeds of crime, if you go up the chain of the money laundering scheme and at some point you lose it because for various reasons, then even if you hypothesize that family is behind it all, there's no way to prove it. In Italy, we have a different type of investigation where confiscation can be done even without the direct link with the proceeds of crime. It's a whole other story, very invasive, sometimes borderline illegal in terms of human rights. But so it's a choice to make. But if you are, the moment, let's put it this way, the moment you see in the news that there has been an investigation into money laundering and the people are responsible are organized criminals, those are not very good organized criminals. Those are just at the first stage of their evolution. And we have those in the Ndrangheta, those who try to be that, and they usually get caught.
Mm-hmm. And is this family working with other ethnic organized crime groups in those areas as well, or with other Ndrangheta's families?
So the dynasties tend to work with other Ndrangheta families. The dynasties work with the dynasties or work with new families, and they keep it very traditional. That's why it's so difficult to, track them or even get to them. But even within the dynasties and the new generations of the dynasties, and when I say new generations, I mean, more or less my age, 40-something. That's the time when you can be involved. You have a bit more of a strategic thinking for the family. If you've been around for the long without getting caught, they do have to separate the business. So the business gets separated, especially the drug trade. One side is the people who put the money in, so the financier, and then within the financier, someone, usually some golden boy, gets involved into the logistics, which involves other criminal groups. There was a very well-known operation, which is a bit old now. It's 2008, but it explains very well what you have in Australia. It's a very well-known case of over 4 tons of MDMA pills found in the port of Melbourne and about 160 kilos of cocaine, all engaged by a criminal group made of 14, 15 people 4 or 5 of them were Ndrangheta members. The others were Australian, British Australian. They were a couple of Greeks, I think, a couple of Lebanese, so different others, Balkans somewhere. And the group was sharing the pie. So all of this cargo wasn't just for one group. They were all chipping in with the financing. And the person responsible for the financing of the Ndrangheta was a man called Pasquale Barbaro. He's been convicted by law enforcement in 2014. He was kind of like the bridging point, the boss of the drug trade group, but within the Ndrangheta, he was the bridging point between the family. The Barbaro families particularly were not well known in many in many circles for Ndrangheta relations. So the people in the family who had, given him the reins of the business. So he was handling the business, being the face of the business, let's say. So yes, he was bringing in the cash from the family, but at the same time, he was the one taking in the risk and the blame. So that's very common when you have such huge shipments. 4.4 tons of MDMA is a huge amount of money once it's on the street. It doesn't always happen like that, but when it explains how the way the Ndrangheta works, whenever you have such a big investment and such a big financing job, you put one of yours, that person is credible enough to interact with other criminal groups, but at the same time, still separated enough from the actual financier of the job, because the financier of the job were back in Italy. So yes, they were from his own family, but the layers of separation were still enough for the actual financier not to be touched by this investigation. He was the one charged with drug trafficking. He was the one, of course, because he was the one physically with the cash. But where was the cash coming from? God help us, we don't know. I mean, we know more or less, but it's not like anyone really paid for it. So it's a very smart way of compartmentalizing ways, especially when you have others involved, other criminal groups involved, the bikies, other ethnic groups, the Chinese for money laundering. So the Ndrangheta has always been extremely good at separating roles, so that if one gets caught, the rest doesn't get necessarily attached.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Anna. Thank you for participating today.
Thank you.